So in this last video on the behaviourist approach, we're looking at social learning theory. And just a quick recap again on what we mean by the behaviourist approach. It is looking at our behaviour as if it comes from the environment. So how we behave comes from our experiences and the people around us. Now, so far we've looked at classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and both of these are examples of traditional learning theory. So we learn directly from consequences or from associations. Social learning theory is really saying that we learn from people around us. So we learn from observing role models. So in this case, we watch a behaviour being performed. We see whether positive or negative consequences occur for the role model. So this is a key difference. These aren't consequences which occur for us. These are consequences which occur for the person we're watching. And then we decide whether or not to imitate that behaviour based on those consequences. So mediational processes then of social learning theory. This really means the things that need to take place, or the things that need to be in place in order for imitation to happen, or in order for a behaviour to be learned. So the first one is attention, and that is pretty much exactly what it says. You have to attend to the behaviour that's being performed. So the observer pays attention to the role model. The behaviour is being modelled or demonstrated by that role model, and it's likely that in some way the observer will identify with the model. So it could be that they're of a similar age or the same gender. It could be that they look up to that role model. For example, children often look up to adults as people to imitate. The second thing that has to happen is retention. And that simply means that the behaviour has to be remembered. So we can watch a behaviour, but if we haven't remembered what it is, we won't be able to copy it. The third thing is reproduction. Now, in order for imitation to actually occur, the person who was watching has to be physically capable of imitating the behaviour. So we see a lot of things on TV, or children watch adults do things, and they can maybe observe that behaviour and they can remember it, but they don't have the physical capability to actually repeat it. So the example I've used is that a 5-year-old could observe his father cooking, but he doesn't have the motor capabilities yet to actually repeat that action, so it won't be carried out. Imitation won't happen. And the last thing that's necessary is motivation. So there has to be some sort of a reason for carrying out the action. And this could be because we saw the role model being vicariously reinforced. So vicariously reinforced means we watched them being rewarded for something. And if we see that, then we're more likely to carry out the action. And again, we're more likely to carry it out if the rewards of the action outweigh the costs. So the key study you need to know for social learning theory was carried out by Bandura. Now, he used a Bobo doll, which is what you can see here on the screen. It's a large blow-up doll, weighted at the bottom. You can hit the top of it and it bounces back at you. So what Bandura did was he took 2 groups of children, and half of them watched an aggressive role model and half of them watched a non-aggressive role model. Now, he then took them into a second room. There were a series of toys that they could play with there, including a Bobo doll, and he observed them through a one-way mirror to watch how they would play. And what he found was that those children who had observed the aggressive role model performed more aggressive acts and similar acts to the role models they'd seen than those who watched the non-aggressive role model. He also noted that boys performed more aggressive acts than girls did. If we link this back then to our mediational processes, so the child was the observer. They were paying attention to the behaviour that the role models, the adults, were performing. So in this case it was aggression, and because they were young children and the role models were adults, it's quite likely that they identified with them, they looked up to them in some way. Now, the behaviour that was being observed was carried out just a short time before they were taken into the room with the toys, so there was no issues around the children remembering the behaviour. The behaviours that were performed were also very simple. The children in the playroom were presented with the same toys that the adults had used in the modelling part of the study. So it was all simple enough that young children could carry out these actions if they wanted to. And lastly, motivation. The children were, between observing the role models and being taken into the playroom, they were frustrated by being shown another room of toys, which they were told they couldn't play with because they were for other children. And this was just to get the children into sort of an emotional state where if they wanted to be aggressive, they could be. And Bandura has actually carried out further studies, and these studies have shown that if children watch a role model who is rewarded, they are far more likely to carry out the action than if they watch a role model who is punished for a particular action. So things you need to know before you come into the lesson. First of all, make sure you can write an explanation of social learning theory in your own words, so using key terms but not using an example. Secondly, make sure you can write an outline of Bandura's study, including the aim, the method, the results and the conclusion. As always, you can look back over this video or use the pre-reading if you want to go into a little bit more depth.